Very quick 2-minute summary. Oh, I thought it was recording. Welcome, hilarious spirits, to spirit session number 19. I'm going to go through a quick recap of the first 18 sessions of spirit so that you can kind of tie in wherever you are in life and then rebuild this circle of reason that Hegel talks about. So I'm going to try and do it in 2 minutes. This is becoming a bit of an art. So number one, session one was about Hegel being the greatest philosopher because he summed up all the previous philosophers. Number two is that nobody understood him for 200 years. Number three is that once you do understand him, he empowers you to change the world. Number four is that you got to get beyond the stereotypes of totalitarianism and fascism and grasp the first negation, which leads to the more modern negation, where he's more profound. The fifth session was about where do you start with him once you're ready? You start at his beginning, which begins the circle of reason. Number six was that once you end the circle of reason, it sounds religious, but philosophy is the sublation of religion, not the negation. Number seven is that we do this kind of sublation with a universal logic that we're going to put into analytic notation for the Nobel Peace Prize. Number eight was about you start this universal logic with polemics, but that's just the first negation. Number nine is about the truth of that first negation being the second negation, which is sublation as refutation. The 10th session is a masterclass in that called The Science of Logic. The 11th session is about how the science of logic is more profound than people think. It is literally the ineffable speaking itself. Number 12 is about the purpose of life being the universal logic is living. Number 13 is about liberating everybody's spirit as the purpose of life and this logic. Number 14 is that you start having this mystical kind of experience like you're connected to the absolute or God. Or number 15, as an atheist, you can see it as connecting to yourself in this logical profoundness. Number 16 is about our gurus, our modern gurus are just repeating the science of logic in implicit form. Number 17 is about how we have to sublate the old mysticism and superstition and kind of bring it up to this fulfillment with genuine philosophy as mystical and grasping the power of now. And then 18 is about the limit of your dialectical reason is the limit of your fun, making philosophy fun again with games and flow. So that leads us to today, number 19. And the people who've been in the session so far know that SOS, so it's 19 SOS, has two meanings. It stands for Sessions of Spirit, but also Save Our Souls, play an expression to say we are in trouble in the world and we need to do something about it by introducing more wisdom into the world. The title today is called, What is Laughter in Genuine Philosophy? So there's this one paragraph summary, and it goes like this for the session. The tremendously adept philosopher is not merely a master of polemics and adversarial argumentation and debate. A genuine philosopher is one who grasps the inner, most concrete core of universal logic as the notion. Hegel declares the notion to be the most difficult concept of the entirety of logic to grasp for ordinary consciousness. It is this infinite vitality, and as enjoyment, it is blessedness. As mind, it is free spirit. It is the continual self-divestment from itself, coupled with immediate transcendence. This self-violating in blessedness is the prime principle for humor and the cosmic giggle ringing through any genuinely speculative philosophy in all its fractal parts. I hope that made sense to you guys. But if it doesn't, that's what the third part of the notes is for. We're going to unfold that. So in the last session, somebody said, well, that wasn't very fun. Well, I'm explaining how to have fun and how to have humor. I'm not saying that I'm necessarily humorous. It's an art. Okay, we got to get the arts in here, the drama, the playwrights. We got to get the masters of the craft, and then they can teach us to sort of liberate our spirit in that way, bring in some viola spolin. So what I've done for you is I've just posted a couple of memes, and I hope you laugh at them. So the first one is talking about a very unusual character, and his name is Zizek. And Zizek, if you're watching this, keep up the good work, you rapscallion. I think Zizek is one of the people we have on the planet today that has something called what Hegel calls a universal personality type, or one of the closest people to it. And a lot of people can't grasp this, you can't see it. Instead, what happens is what's in the meme. In the first picture, people who think clearly, who are genuine philosophers and understand Hegel, see him just as he is. But the problem with Hegel, as we talked about in the first session, is that nobody understands him because the way he wrote was with a special order of these words. Logic, as we talked about before, is like a plant. Logic, the categories in your mind you're using to sift reality are literally, they grow in your mind from like the first seed thought. There's a thought in your head and in the world, to be honest. It's a metaphysical thought that literally is like the seed of the plant. And it's the root thought of all the other thoughts you're using to make sense of your reality and to have humor in the first place. So if you don't read Hegel in that way, if you read him in an ordinary way, what's going to happen to you is the second picture and the third picture. And if you're lucky, you might get to the fourth picture. But Hegel is usually lumped into these categories of philosophy. The first one sort of being continental philosophy. So Hegel was kind of coming at the end of this tradition where he was seen as sort of the summit. He was the end of continental philosophy, and then analytic philosophy started up right after. The analytics tried to ignore all the continental philosophers, especially Hegel. But even the continental philosophers saw Hegel as some kind of aberration. Like there was what they were doing before he came along, and then there was him. And even they didn't understand what he was doing. So they saw him as like a bit of a monster. And the king hired a bunch of philosophers to try and crush his philosophy once he died, which we talked about in session number 2. So if he doesn't fit into continental philosophy, then where does he fit? Well, he's supposed to fit into the opposite, you think, analytic philosophy, but he doesn't. They just see him as, instead of this more graphic, dramatic monster, they see him as this like monstrous, bland cipher that makes no sense. It's just random information and what they love to call meaningless verbiage. So Hegel's masterpieces to a lot of people, very smart people, is what they call meaningless verbiage. But then Zizek comes along, and I'm kind of on the same path as he. It seems like people who are committed to the truth, they sort of realize that the first 20, 30 years of living in society is just a version of slavery in a way for most of us. And they decide, I need to break a little bit from the system and start studying philosophy seriously. And I think that's what Zizek did. He, I think in his 30s, decided to move in with his parents or something like that so he could read philosophy without getting a job. But let's make a distinction here. There's a difference between getting a job and getting slavery. I would love to work a normal job and make a decent living wage, but right now, a lot of the jobs aren't that. And technological unemployment is making it worse because we're in a system that is not based on this freedom of spirit that Hegel's talking about. It's not a very playful experience a lot of the time. And for millions of people, it's extremely oppressive. So anyway, Zizek kind of did this incredible detour. And then, I think by the time he was 30 or 40, he wrote this masterpiece where he grasped Hegel. And I'm sort of starting on that now. I kind of broke through too. There's like a breakthrough moment. You will experience it. Just have the faith that the world is rational. You can do it. And when I see Zizek, he does that because he has not only grasped it theoretically, in the world, his presence in the world has this kind of charm about it. And some people are thinking charm. Some people don't see it as charm. They see him as a complete violation, because what he's doing is he's embodying the negation and the sublation in a very fast and deep sense. And I'm going to hopefully teach you how to see that by the end of the session, and not just Zizek, but anybody, and to start pulling it out and not seeing them as monsters or these bland ciphers. So there's a joke that pervades the tradition of comedy. And it's that once you get really good at making jokes, there's like the ultimate joke that if you say in the wrong way, it's a career ender. Or if you say if you do a really good job at it, it could really be a career ender. But it's called the aristocrats. It's called the joke about the aristocrats. And it's very risky for me to put this in here, but Zizek is famous for his jokes. And as philosophers, genuine philosophers, we should rise to becoming good and crafty at navigating the dialectic with humor. But here's him telling a version of the joke, and it's supposed to be incredibly violating. It's supposed to be the most violating joke you can possibly think up. And you're supposed to somehow try and make it funny, but it's so bad that the funniness of the joke is that the more violating you can make it is the craft, is the intelligence in it. But the more you try and violate people, the less intelligent it seems. So you get this weird contradiction happening in your head at an extreme level. So even, I'm not even going to say it in my speech in case like maybe somebody's playing this with children around, but read it for yourself. You can see that Hegel's doing, Zizek is doing a Hegelian reversal. Even in the joke itself, he's doing this incredible meta commentary where he's just flipping this negation around and he's sublating, he's going all over the place because he understands the logic, that universal logic. When you become a genuine philosopher, you become free in it. It's liberating. And Zizek is taking full poetic license of that. In anything he writes, in any interview, once you understand that he's doing this, he becomes benign to you. And then the insights, the incredible insights can kind of penetrate. So the butt of the joke is that the most volatile thing you can do is just explain Hegel to somebody and people go crazy. So we're going to try and do a little bit of that today in the next, I guess, 25 minutes or so, by saying, okay, well, what is it about this experience that makes it funny? It's like, it's got this same thing as the Tao. It's like, it's got this ineffability to it. And Wittgenstein, I think, was grappling with this too. There's like this flippingness that happens in our lives. When we try and speak it clearly, it flips on us. And there's like these double entendres and there's puns and there's all these, like, you think something's going to happen and then it changes. Well, this phenomenon, you can explain it, but you have to experience it to kind of know. So in the last session, so let's go to point number 3 here now. I hope you survived the aristocrat joke. And there's 5 more I put in the comments if you really want to get into Zizek. If you try and dissect humor, which is exactly what we're about to do, it's like this famous quote. It's like analyzing humor is like dissecting a frog. Few people are interested and the frog dies. And that's what we did with playfulness yesterday. I put a little bit of a game in there, and if somebody can beat me and get more than 11, which you can, but you have to, like, play as an experience, you know. When we're sitting in front of our screens, especially after the pandemic, we got screen burnout, you know. It's hard to make this super fun, but we will get better at it. And humor is the same way. What was lacking was this experience, which usually comes down to speed. So a lot of people don't usually think about speed when they think about humor. Some people do, because it comes to you in a flash, you know, like the moment of realization is the moment that you have that epiphany that is simultaneously hurting you, but you're enjoying it. So the speed concept is a critical part of actual laughter, but we're going to break it down in terms of the logic here. Point number 4 is relating this directly to Hegel now. There's something called the speed of pure thought. So in the science of logic, and if you don't know what that is and you're new, you can look back at the other sessions. It's Hegel's masterpiece, and it's not very funny. But when you know how to read it, it is actually quite funny, and you put some jokes in there. But in the supersensuous realm of pure thought, the speed of thought is instantaneous. It's so fast, there's actually no time. It's just pure thought thinking itself immediately. What drives the thoughts forward is literally pure contradiction. The thoughts thinking themselves are moving forward at this instantaneous speed through literal pure contradicting themselves. So they try and stay in themselves, like even if they try and hold themselves together as pure thoughts, not thoughts about things, not thoughts about the world, not like, we're not talking about Plato's imperfect thoughts. We're talking about pure perfect thoughts themselves, try and maybe hold themselves there in their self-identity. They try and do that. But what happens is their own opposite, their own other is in them. So as soon as they try and know themselves, they just instantaneously, spontaneously turn into their other. And then there's a contradiction that spontaneously sublates them into the next other of that whole category. And it just like goes infinitely fast around this circle. Humor is kind of like this. And this is why we have the old version of humor, which is point number 5. It's talking about incongruency theory. Humor was explained through, okay, when you see something incongruent, there's something about the incongruency that's contradictory that makes you laugh. But nobody could really put their finger, they couldn't pinpoint what exactly it was. And what it is they're trying to pinpoint speculative thinking. This is one of Hegel's linchpins, and he gives it to us clearly in this universal logic, in this sort of circle of reason that doubles back on itself. And when you get really good at this way of thinking, you approximate a form of thinking called the notion. And Hegel, as we covered in previous sessions, says this is the hardest thing to grasp in the science of logic. But it is this immediate, keyword is immediate, right? Immediate means fast, it means instantaneous. It's an immediate self-differentiation into your other. So the thing that is not you, usually an enemy, something you don't understand, the unknown. And then it's the crazy thing about the notion is that it logically, instantaneously brings that thing back into itself. So there's an instantaneous separation and instantaneous return, which means that the whole thing is instantaneous. So that means it's like it's not even happening, right? But it is happening, but it's all instantaneous. When you get good at humor, you're doing this. And when we look at, master comedians, whether George Carlin or I should say different types, because he's an atheist. What's a theistic comedian? I'm thinking of 101 Huntley Street. That's not very funny though. Sunday school is not very funny to most people. I should have done my research. Anyway, there's a lot of greats. We have, I want to say a couple of comedians, but now there's been some scandals out there because when you do the art, this craft of humor, you get yourself into trouble sometimes. But there's some comedians out there that are just going to rip into me. Okay, well, when you're good at this, you actually are embodying the movement of this notion. And the weird thing is a lot of people don't, there he is, Dave Chappelle. Dave, I want to mention you. The George Floyd stuff, very deep, very profound. I don't know how many people could have made that humorous and meaningful, but you did. In a way, though, all the greats, the GOATs, they are masterful at this notional stuff. And there's something that is also correlated here that doesn't get brought up often, but they've done studies on very funny people, and there is a statistical correlation with IQ. Now, whether you believe in IQ, you've studied it, or you believe more in EQ, everything has its right moment. But for some reason, IQ correlates very strongly with humor. And I think it is because of speed. IQ is just about information processing. How many dialectics can you process and pattern recognize in a moment of time, of linear time? We're not talking about just notional time. And IQ, the higher up you go, the more you can do per unit time. So that means the more oppositions, more contradictions, more speculative thinking you can achieve in a single second. And that means when you're with other people, you're able to pattern recognize and put these kind of notional relationships together before other people realize it. And that moment of realization is key for humor. You have to kind of beat that moment of realization, or else you might ruin the punchline. The punchline, in terms of the logic, is sort of like the moment of realization before that speculative moment clicks. And you got to line that up just right, or else you'll miss it. It's tricky. So there is this correlation. I think that's how we explain it logically. Does that mean that people that don't have high IQs or higher IQs can't be funny? No, because you can have an organic kind of humor where you spontaneously live it. You don't have to think it. But for the people that are trying to master the craft, they can think it and create it, and they can live it heuristically, intuitively. So that's why people generally operate and they live their lives in pockets, because humor is really what binds us. We grow together in humor. It's a really profound and meaningful thing we need to kind of survive the harshness as we evolve. And so people stick to their pockets because it's kind of like groupthink. You all intuitively share the same dialectics, so that when you violate each other, or when you are joking around, you understand each other very quickly. And so you don't necessarily need high IQ, but if you're gonna philosophize about it and embody it that way, it helps. But as you memorize the content, you can internalize it as a heuristic, and then you can kind of mimic high IQs. So this is what training does. This is what catches you up. But it comes down to this idea that you can't just talk about it, you have to live it, and there's a speed to it. So the old theory was, okay, incongruence. Yes, we see contradictions in the absurd. But what does Hegel say? Well, Hegel's more along the lines of sublating that theory. So it's not a negation, that is still true. They're getting to the truth of it, but what's the clarity we're looking for? Well, the clarity is in modern presentation, kind of grasped by this guy who started something called the Hurl Lab. I think it's called it's a humor lab. And he calls it the benign violation theory of humor. And so if you look right in the title there, now that we're becoming speculative, dialectical, genuine philosophers, right in the title, you can see a dialectic right there. Benign violation. Those are opposites, right? What's benign doesn't hurt you, what's violation does hurt you. And they did this brilliant sort of analysis to show that you can have contradictions, but if they don't have the benign violation simultaneous speculativeness, then you still don't get humor. So it's a more precise theory. They're pointing out the exact dialectic that you need. It's the principle of humor is what Hegel would call it. The one opposition which creates all the other forms is what's called the principle. It's the essential opposition, the contradiction that defines the rest of the spectrum. So in terms of humor, it looks like it could be this benign violation dialectic. What's interesting is, I wonder if I should go into that more. Benign violation theory is dialectical because it has this principle as a dialectic, but even if you go into the past, people have been embodying this for a long time, just not explaining it this way. So Socrates was one of our greatest philosophers of the past, and there's something called, Socratic irony, where he would do this dialectical flipping, and he would do it very fast, but his humor wasn't from necessarily him contemplating it. So what happened with Socrates, according to Hegel, is that he actually had this oracle inside of him, and the oracle was this incredible heuristic, super sensuous kind of like processing that knew the dialectic. He just somehow absorbed it and was in tune with the cosmic giggle of the universe. And when he was interacting with people, he just pattern recognized immediately, and his intuition would give him the reversals. He knew how all the categories were structured, but he didn't explicate it as a science, which is what Hegel did. So Hegel took Socrates and then through Plato and Aristotle rebuilt the circle of logic that his oracle was going through. The benign violation theory of humor is the same thing. Socratic irony is the same thing. And then there's, I don't know how to say his name, Bertolt Brecht. He's a famous artist, dramatist, playwright, and he had this concept called Verfremdungsstift. As I'm learning about these amazing people, I'm seeing the dialectics in them. And when you look him up, that is the concept of creating distance. So the power of this dialectical analysis of benign violation theory is that you can change, it gives you a freedom, a way to think about humor so you can actually create it more in your life, just like flow states. Once you know how to create games, anywhere you go in your life, you can start to create these ideal experiences, and you can do it fast. So one way to create a lot of humor is by creating distance. So when you have a violation, and the violation is the negation. So in terms of the universal logic, violation is the negation, right? The first negation. We know there's a second negation, right? So the violation is the first negation. You absolutely need humor. You absolutely need a negation to have humor. If you just have benignness, it's not funny. If you just have violation, it's painful. It's not funny either. You need to have both of them. And I put a link to a video and some quotes to Hegel to explain more in depth how to think about it. But in terms of creating distance, when you have a violation, when you are immediately immersed in the experience, you can't laugh. You have to create a sort of separation where you can reflect on it. And then that distance makes it benign. So the further you are away from the violation, the more likely you'll see it as benign. And there's 3 ways to do that according to benign violation theory. Brecht was right. You have to create distance, or Brecht. I hope I'm doing okay. I'm going to be talking about thousands of philosophers. So tomorrow I'll be saying how we're going to actually handle this abundance without having to be experts yet. All we need is the universal logic, because it's the essence of all of them. And then we can get the real experts to fill in what's called the particularities. And the particularities is what kind of makes it difficult to have humor in all types of situations, because the particularities are infinite. It's the sensuousness of nature. It's the infinite creativity that you can create permutations and combinations in almost any way that your caprice can imagine. But they all have this kind of, in humor, this kind of craft of making distance, and comedians are amazing at it. They try and make it so that maybe if they're making a joke, they don't make it about you, because then you might get offended. Try not to identify with the norms. They try and create psychological distance through the subject, through time, by making it far away in time. It happened a long time ago, so it's safer now. Or they just try and make it not seem real. The object doesn't really seem like a real violation. And then they sometimes just give an alternate explanation, which is the philosophical distance. But in the last couple of minutes, I want to say something I hope is a little bit profound and new. This is missing in current global culture, is this principle of humor. We don't understand it speculatively. We don't understand it with this depth of logic like Hegel understands it. Our artists understand it on an intuitive level, which is why they can do it. But when it comes to politics, sometimes they fall apart. You know, if our artists could grasp this, they could maybe be our politicians and do a great job with the logic in an artistic way. But at the moment, we're trying to deal with the violations in the world through a concept called political correctness. Political correctness has its place in the world, but it also has this sort of oppressive feeling that comes along with it. And why is that? It's not fun to be around somebody who's always politically correct. And it's because they're trying to get rid of that first negation. They're trying to get rid of a violation in their life, but they don't understand the logic. So instead of sublating with it, they negate it in an abstract negation. And so when they negate that abstract negation, what does it do? It conditions them. They stay in the negative moment of reason, and they sit there and they war with it, and it never goes away. What you flee from conditions you. So you can go far, 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 but you'll always be tied to it. The only way to get through it is to achieve the genuine infinite, which is to sublate it into yourself. Okay, so this new principle of humor is like the new heterodoxy. It allows you to have violation and to grow through violation in a safe, benign way through humor. That's what we're doing here. We're saying we're not going to be naive and get rid of the first negation because you can't. It's universal according to Hegel. This is everywhere. Our minds aren't just dialectical. The universe itself is dialectical, and that's why it can be funny in its absurdity. So we're going to try and change political correctness and change the political landscape. This hyper-partisanship can be solved with this new principle of correcting political correctness with humor, by understanding the dialectical principle, which is benign violation, and understanding how to navigate these violations and making them benign with distance. This is how you can challenge the state. This is how you can have civil disobedience. All these types of things we're trying to do to approximate this mechanism of growth, this living principle of logic, can now be made fun and humorous because we understand the logic and we can internalize it in a much more blessed kind of way, peaceful way. So now that we understand the logic of what humor is supposed to be, and you have hopefully a new groundbreaking clarity on it. I hope people will start publishing papers on this and spreading the word, because this is new and I'm giving it for free because I want to do more than just publish papers and become famous and get money. And we need to change the world, guys. We need to create a new spirit, and it has to be clear and philosophical. So take this information and use it in whatever way creates value for you to start creating the spirit freely. And then the money, I'll talk about how we're going to make money and restructure the economy in further sessions. But for now, this freedom of spirit, I want to embody that. Maybe I'm not funny, but I can embody that first so we can get this new way of living started. So once you have this principle, you start off in this kind of moment of humor, but then humor and art kind of evolves into religion, according to Hegel, because art is sort of this immediate sensuous grasping of the pure thoughts. And then you kind of go to religion as this representation of it, a sensuous representation, and then philosophers, the pure thoughts themselves. And polemicists are seen as these like, smash down, I win. But it's actually master polemicists, master philosophers are comedians. That's why Plato was amazing to read. That's why our greatest philosophers are usually funny. So I kind of left you with a joke here. You know, what's the difference between a philosophy major and a picnic table? A picnic table can support a family. So if you're feeling bad about that, I am too. I'm struggling as a philosopher. I give you 4 devices to create distance to feel better about it. And I hope you do. If you guys want to join in more, you can join our Facebook group, ask questions, or take the wisdom quiz to start bringing our wisdom into this heuristic principle. And tomorrow we'll talk about how to be this ideal philosopher amongst a plenitude of philosophies and philosophers who are normally in conflict. I hope I did a good job summing that up really quickly. Join me for the discussion in the other link. And I hope you guys found that valuable. And I hope you can keep sublating in a funny, playful, humorous way. Have a good day.